Mr. Speaker, the extremely tragic circumstances of 3 children who were living in hotels under the care of today's NDP government have been brought to light during the past year. This has left Manitobans with many questions for today's NDP. Let me begin with this. Why was there no evidence of a plan to address this situation in the budget speech? Indeed, why wasn't there even a mention of this grave concern in the budget speech?
Speaker, the minister announced that there would be hiring of over 200 additional workers to provide care to children, that there would be an expansion of emergency facilities to provide for children that were no longer able to stay in their home. The minister announced that there would be additional support for foster families. Over 70 spots would be created, Mr. Speaker. All those were announced well before the budget. She didn't wait for the budget before making those announcements and starting to take real action on doing those things, Mr. Speaker. Subsequently, she said she would be shutting down hotels even as a place of last resort and making sure that we provide support to families. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, you will see in the budget that there is additional money for prevention, and that is mentioned in the budget, to work with Aboriginal and Indigenous organizations that work with families to help them prevent from getting in crisis, to help them function more effectively with proper supports in the community. That was in the budget, Mr. Speaker. So the crisis response was well before the budget. The prevention and strategy was put in the budget. And Mr. Speaker, we'll see if the member opposite votes for the budget.
Mr. Speaker, the Children's Advocate report warned in 2004 that this government must get its house in order with respect to emergency shelter for children in CFS care. The tragic death of Tina Fontaine and the recent violence against another 15-year-old girl may have been avoided if today's NDP had heeded that report. Today, this government is once again not listening to the Children's Advocate and is now housing children in their care in jail, sometimes for weeks at a time. Why is today's NDP government using this incomprehensible practice, a practice Grand Chief Derek Nepenak says is one of the worst atrocities we can imagine?
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my previous answer, the use of hotels will no longer be allowed. We've hired over 200 additional people to work with families. Even prior to that, Mr. Speaker, we put in a program for prevention to train people to work with families in their home communities to help those families stay strong. This is a government that has an early childhood development program that does prevention work with families, including in some of the highest need neighborhoods in Winnipeg and projects like Project Bold, Mr. Speaker. In the budget, the member may have noticed that we put additional money in for rent assist to provide more money for families to be able to get stable housing, whether it's in the private sector. We also put more money in the budget to build more social housing. Mr. Speaker, we put additional resources in the budget to assist people to get employment and to be able to get rent assistance when they go into training or employment, Mr. Speaker. And we put more money in the budget for the ultimate prevention program, Mr. Speaker, education, so people could go to school and their families could be supported when they go to school and be able to succeed in school and be able after school to have an after school program. And in addition, Mr. Speaker, 900 additional spaces for childcare in the budget, which is another form of prevention, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard that before.
Yeah, he never kept
Cara Morgan, Executive Director of Anishinaawan, has reported that there are children in the care of today's NDP government being put in jail for throwing an empty water bottle, and that there's a child in care with no charges pending who stayed in jail for weeks. Manitobans cannot comprehend the machinations of today's NDP government, a government whose appetite for debt has no limits, whose infighting knows no bounds, and whose care of children is an atrocity. Mr. Speaker, with CFS reports lined up in front of the minister's door and left to collect dust, I ask, why is today's NDP government ignoring the cries of our most vulnerable citizens?
Mr. Speaker, This is the government that has dramatically expanded by more than double the number of daycare spots in Manitoba, so families can have support while they go to work. This is the government that has 15 straight years of increasing education funding so the kids can have smaller class sizes and better schools. This is the government, for the first time in history, that is building brand new daycares all throughout Manitoba, and every new school has a daycare put in it. This is the first government that brought in an early childhood development program with dramatic increases in funding all throughout the province of Manitoba, and a Healthy Child Committee of Cabinet. And every budget we bring in a poverty reduction strategy, including rent assist, social housing, a higher minimum wage, more training so people can get the opportunity to enter the labor market and earn a living for themselves without losing their rent assist benefits, without losing their national child benefits. All of those things never existed before, Mr. Speaker. And every time we do something like that and make progress, the member from River Heights, what has he done? He talks big now and he votes against it in the budget.